Welcome to episode 14 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I became a mother in 1998, a yoga teacher in 2006, and I've been a consultant for yoga teachers and studios since 2011. I love to read historical fiction and at this time of the year, be out in my vegetable garden. Today's episode is all about teaching private yoga classes. This is for those of you who are wanting to add this in, or for those of you already teaching private yoga classes to add a little bit more. The Connected Yoga Teacher podcast was born out of how I still feel between yoga classes, workshops, and teacher trainings that I get to attend in person. I feel a little bit like I'm alone in the wilderness of yoga entrepreneurship. So I wanted to create a place where you can feel connected as a yoga teacher between the teacher trainings, classes, and workshops that you are taking. It is a place where you can connect to knowledge, inspiration, and community as we hear about a variety of topics from yoga teachers and other professionals. Topics like anatomy, philosophy, marketing, and today, how to add in or increase your private yoga class offerings. I want to make it a little easier for you, the yoga entrepreneur, so that you feel supported and inspired to share the yoga that lights you up. One of the most common questions I hear when I work with yoga teachers is, how do I add in or increase the number of private yoga classes to my schedule? And for very good reason. This adds an increased income and it gives us the ability to really serve individual needs for our students. Our guest today, Connell Potts, specializes in helping yoga teachers to feel confident and prepared when offering private yoga classes. She is an amazing resource on this topic. She describes herself as the private yoga teacher's best friend. Kate is the author and training creator behind The Art of Teaching Private Yoga. She offers in-person teacher trainings, online courses. She supports and cheerleads private yoga teachers so that they can really master the art of teaching private yoga lessons. Kate is bubbly, friendly, and super confident on this topic. Kate is a mother, a wife, and an advocate for self-care, especially when it comes to bubble bath time. She's worked with yoga teachers across the globe in the US, Canada, the UK, and Australia, and still she's fitting in time to really nurture self. So this is something that I resonate with, and it's inspiring to me as a yoga teacher. Welcome today, Kate. It is a real honor to be chatting with you on the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I've been watching the work that you do for quite some time now, just in terms of me picking up tips in your Facebook group that you have for yoga teachers, as well as your website. And I love your posts, so I'm very excited to chat with you today.
Thank you. And thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about private yoga. It's my favorite topic to gush about. And it's also something that I think a lot of people are interested in hearing more about.
Tell me a little bit about how you got started into yoga. Why have you been drawn so much to the private yoga side of things?
Yes. So I actually started yoga, like a lot of people do, in a group class in my hometown gym. I was in high school and I had a swim team friend. We swam together and she was just this figure of mystery to me. She would go to like surf camps in Mexico. She did all these independent things while we were 16 years old. And I was so taken by all the things that she was interested in. And so when she asked me to go to a yoga class, I was like, okay. And I went with her to a yoga class. And as someone who was active in high school, but also had a lot of conflicts with my body and body image and my size, even though I was pretty active, I took to it right away because it felt like the first thing that I was really, really good at. I was super flexible. And so being in a class like that, I felt like I was nailing it. And the only parts that were hard were the chaturangas and the strength stuff. And so being so physically inclined to feel like I was excelling at it, I got really hooked and I loved it. So I drug my mom to Target and I bought a yoga DVD and I was doing yoga and I just started it that way and carried that practice a little bit through college, my first couple years. And then I moved to Iowa after my second year of college, and I got really serious about my practice then. And that quickly rolled into me jumping into teacher training and graduating from college and teacher training at the very same weekend. It was awesome because my parents were in town. I grew up in Boston, so they came out to Iowa for my graduation, and they were able to be at both. It was the same weekend. And so it was like, here I am. I've just graduated college and also my teacher training. And I have no reason why I can't try this out, teaching yoga and trying to make a living teaching yoga. I had normal post-college bills, but it wasn't like I had a mortgage and a family, and my partner, who's my husband now, had a business that I could work on the side. And so it was a really easy transition for me to say no to a more traditional track and just try this on for a little bit. And what I found right away was that I was really having to say yes to every opportunity that came my way. That was some advice that I got right away, was to say yes, to create opportunity. And then once you've done it for a little bit of time, then begin to assess what's going on. So those yeses led me to gym classes and teaching classes in the basement of a church and teaching in a studio, eventually managing a studio and coming on as the managing partner of that same studio. I was saying yes to private lessons. I was saying yes to workshops. I was doing all kinds of stuff. And I was quickly learning what I wanted to start saying no to. And one of those things was this hustle of driving around to all these different classes and making, not a consistent amount of money each week. And what I wanted to say yes to was the group classes that I was teaching that I was making X amount of money per week, and also private lessons. Because what I was finding was that when I was teaching corporate classes and seeing the same people week after week, and also when I was teaching private lessons, was that I was actually able to see a palpable change in what was going on for them. And this wasn't hugely revolutionary to me at the time because my teacher trainer actually was very into private yoga. And his philosophy was that if we can't teach an individual, then we can't teach group classes, because groups are one to many and we need to be able to see the needs of individuals in order to cater to them as a group. So I had a lot of things framed to me in that way. Another thing that he always talked about was the business side of private yoga and how it was a lot more lucrative and reliable and predictable than being a yoga teacher who just taught a bunch of freelance classes. So all of these things, plus a little bit of background in Ashtanga yoga and a Mysore style practice, really are pushing me in the direction of doing more private lessons. So as I started to clean up my schedule and doing more series-based things that were going to equal a certain amount of money per week and then as a result per month, in addition to private yoga, my arrangement with the co-owners of the studio dissolved. And that was because I was really finding that I didn't want to be in charge of a yoga studio and I didn't want to be in charge of a bunch of yoga teachers. I wanted to be teaching and I wanted to be directing my own brand. And so that's what I started to do. So out of necessity, when the studio closed, I had to spin the fact that I had no space for my clients. So I started to tell them that I was moving in a direction of really working with people on their home practices, which was true. And at that time, that meant that I was seeing clients only in their home, because what I was finding was that we were creating this utopia that they would visit. They would come to this studio that was clean and light and airy, and there was a Buddha in the, corner, and they were feeling a certain way. And then they'd go home and try to replicate that and do their homework and start this practice on their own, and something was falling short for them. They didn't know how to translate that because I wasn't teaching them. So out of necessity, I started to see people in their homes framed around this idea that my specialty was helping people create and sustain at-home yoga practices. And that's how I started to market my services in my town. And that's how I grew my teaching practice. And flash forward, 5-6 years now. And what I found at that point was that that wasn't really something that people were using, A, as a selling point, but also B, as a strength. People weren't looking at private yoga as something that could be super customizable, not only in terms of the sequencing and the approach, but also in the business side of things. And so as someone who's always been super into businesses, my husband and I have a business that we also run in addition to yoga, and he was an entrepreneur for about 10 years before he went into a more traditional job track. I knew I wanted to bring that forward too. It's a gift that I have to teach and to share business. And so the art of teaching private yoga was born out of all of those places together.
That's amazing. I love to hear your journey on that, especially that you had a teacher that was so in tune with kind of where you wanted to go with it as well. So I'm curious, what did you take in college? Because you had this choice then. Do I do that or do I become a full-time yoga teacher?
Yes. So I had a lot of majors in college. I started off with criminology, criminal justice, and then I moved over to psychology. And then my background in high school and college as a swimmer was that I worked in aquatics. So my only jobs were lifeguarding, swim lesson coordinating, and teaching swimming lessons and teaching lifeguarding classes. So, halfway through college, I realized that I really didn't want to go to grad school for psychology, but there's not much to do if you just have an undergrad degree and not a specialty, which is a lot like business or a lot like 200-hour teacher trainings if you just have the base. So I decided to get a degree in leisure studies or park and recreation studies. And so that's what my degree is in, with a specialty in aquatics, actually, because that's where my background is.
Oh, I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, nobody's asked me that yet.
I was just like, well, you're just kind of at a crossroads.
Yes.
I love it how you're also really focused on that this is a business. And I think that's why I connect so much with your message, because that can be missing sometimes. So if yoga teachers are maybe just out of their 200-hour teacher training now, or maybe they're in it, or maybe they've been teaching for a while and mostly group classes, what would you say they could do to start teaching more private classes or even a private class?
Yes. And I love this question because I think that the start is the hardest part in a lot of ways, because we're not sure if it's more of like a logistical thing or if it's more of a mindset thing. And I actually think it's a little bit of both. I think that the first thing to do is to really get clear about who it is that you want to help in the way of private yoga. But with that being said, I know how hard that is. I know that there are teachers that have been teaching for 5 and 10 and 15 years that aren't super clear about what their unique position is or their unique proposition is to be offering value to people. They're not sure what differentiates what they offer compared to the yoga teacher down the street. So this can feel like a really big thing to do. The best way to really start to figure out who you want to help is start with some organic ideas around who would make sense to help based on your background. So back to my aquatics background, I also was a swim coach for 10 years. I just hung up my golden whistle, if you will, when I had my baby, because it was just so much for me to juggle all of the changes that this is the first season that I haven't taught, coached in 10 years. So, which is kind of exciting. And I haven't even had time to miss it because I've been so busy with baby, which I love, but it's an interesting thing. But this relates to the organic thought that I had when I graduated my 200-hour, which was, I have a background in aquatics. I was a swimmer myself. I've coached swimming for all these years. Naturally, it would make sense for me to combine yoga with swimmers and work with athletes in this way. And so I did that for quite a bit, actually. I partnered up with local swim teams. I learned a lot about the different intersections of yoga and swimming and how there were a lot of parallels with movement and strokes and breathing techniques. I spent time reaching out to clubs. I created some workshops, and then I even expanded that into yoga for triathletes because I had done a triathlon like one time and it wasn't even professional. It was like huffing and puffing through the 5K. But anyway, nobody's judging, right? And so that was my organic process into trying to figure out what it was that I was uniquely positioned to do. What I found through doing that was that I didn't want to do that. I actually wanted to help people do something that didn't actually come organically, but it took time for me to develop that. So starting somewhere that seems to make sense at first is a really great starter step, and then it will become refined. I think that a lot of people want a very specific answer, and I see this when we're niching, like I'm talking about now. I see this on websites. I see this on people wanting from me when I'm coaching them on the business and the teaching side of teaching private yoga, that they want very specific answers. And there are some of those, but sometimes too, we need to leave quite a bit of room for us to figure it out as we go. The tangible get started step is to actually teach. So if you haven't taught at all, then one of the things that can be really good is to sit down and look at what your plan is to find your first 5 clients. And if you are fresh out of a 200-hour, my advice is different than if you're a seasoned teacher. If you're a seasoned teacher, your plan to find your first private clients should be very much based on where you're already teaching. You should be plucking people out of where you're teaching right now, whether that's group classes or workshops, or if you're a teacher training. Any of those people are going to make great clients for right now while you get more clear about who you help. I think that we tend to think that we can just come out of our 200-hour and teach private yoga, which is possible. But group classes offer immense value because we get to see a lot of different bodies in one place at one time. And that exposure gives us an immense amount of knowledge, not only about how human bodies can and should move, but also about where we gravitate towards and where we feel like our expertise is or where we would like to build it. So if you're a seasoned teacher, you need to start creating a plan around finding your first private clients, the first 5 out of places you're already teaching. If you're a brand new teacher, then I'm going to suggest that you find somebody in your life that is looking for and is likely to be receptive and compliant with a plan of private yoga that's willing to work with you for maybe 4 to 8 weeks on private yoga lessons and go through all of the steps of setting up private yoga sessions with them. And that's going to look like everything from how you get information from them for the first time, paperwork. And then what is good about this is that you're going to move in a very organic timeline with somebody who is your quote unquote beta person. You're going to have the time to create paperwork, and that's like the first step. Then you're going to have time to create evaluations and assessments that'll help you figure out what's going on for them. And then you'll have time to sequence to their specific needs and work out those kinks, and then so on. And that's going to be a really powerful way for you to do this in a way that isn't overwhelming. It's not all at once. It's a slow marathon, if you will, of getting everything started. And then from there, at the end, you can refine and work a little bit backwards and then fully put this out there in the world and market it.
That's amazing. This is a lot of stuff that's great information. So defining that who you're going to teach is really the key to start. But I like how you said that you might start somewhere and then that might take you somewhere else. So for instance, say if there was a soccer mom, she could start doing like private yoga classes for soccer moms or something.
Absolutely. All those built-in intersections of the other passions we already have with yoga are a really great, like these little breadcrumbs almost of kind of figuring it out. Because when you think about, we tend to think about our ideal client in business speak as somebody who is kind of removed from us. But a lot of times we're interested in working with the person who is our quote unquote ideal client, or in my program, I call this our perfect fit private partner. I love alliteration. We tend to think of that as somebody who's removed from us, but oftentimes they are somewhere on the journey that we've already moved through. And a great example of this is the fact that I always reiterate the fact that this changes is because I was so hard on myself, feeling like I had to have all the answers to all the things that I tell people to do, that I was hitting resistance that had nothing to do with me being ready and more so me needing to think that I had all the answers. So it's like anybody else. I have thousands of rack cards underneath my futon right now that are for a business with a different name, Kate Connell Yoga, and I have these beautiful cards that I printed up. I've had 3 different websites. There's so many different variations of how your teaching and your business are going to look. And if that's not the case, then you're not growing and stretching and really seeing the potential in front of you and then fulfilling that. So that's a good thing, and it tends to freeze us. And so I always want to touch on it because it's normal, but we just don't always see other people's progressions because it's such a micro look that oftentimes, unless it's like this huge variance from what they're doing into something else, it's more subtle and it looks subtle. And so I think it's just important for me, based on my journey, to share that with everybody else so that they feel like they have that invisible permission slip to really give themselves the space they need with starting this journey teaching private yoga.
Right. That's so good. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be forever. That's great advice. And so then that getting out and teaching, would you suggest that a new teacher might start teaching private students? Would they be charging for that, or they are finding someone in their friend circle and saying, hey, can I just walk you through this? And can we do this together?
I used to never suggest that anybody teaches anything for free. And I actually still wouldn't. What I would say is that the only time that I would suggest that you do something for no cost is if you are working on like the assessment phases of private yoga lessons. And what I mean by that is there are two different phases that I think everybody should move a brand new client through on their first session. And one of them is called the intake and one is called the assessment. I think doing these two things for free is okay. I think that doing anything beyond this for free runs the risk of a couple things. I think the first thing is that if you do this for free, you are letting the universe know that this is something that's not as valued by you as it potentially should be. You're also already leading in with some misconceptions around private yoga. One of the biggest one being that private yoga is something that is really just like a group yoga class experience that is delivered to one person in the privacy of their own home or their own studio. And it might be with somebody that has a really difficult schedule or they just want one-on-one attention. I think that's a huge misconception, and I think it's hurt the yoga industry in a lot of ways because private yoga lessons are completely customizable. They're a high-level service, and you need to be an expert in presenting them in order to be effective. And so I think it's important that we differentiate that. And then the third thing is that if somebody's not invested, and money is a great way to invest people, then you're likely not going to get the kind of investment of time and energy and effort on their part that you really need in order for you to learn as a teacher. So I am very much pro charging. But back to what I said about the free part for the intake and the assessment. I want to just define those because if you're not part of my community, you may not have heard them before. So the first lesson of a private yoga session for me is all about figuring out who this person is, evaluating their needs, and really setting the tone of your relationship with them, but also the tone for what it is that they need. Not just what they're telling you that they need, but what you're observing that they need through the intake and through the assessment. The intake is a full conversation. It's a holistic look at who this person is, what their life looks like, what their objectives are, and their take on physically what's going on for them. It's also a way for you to start to connect some dots. So if somebody is saying something like, my goal is to sleep better, and then you're noticing that there's some things going on not only in what they're telling you about their physicality, but you're also noticing things as they take you through their normal day that are starting to come out of the woodwork for you as imbalances. That can be something that you tailor to and then later address. The second part after the conversation is an actual physical assessment where you're leading through them a series of poses and movements that are going to help you measure their mobility and their range of motion, their ability or inability to do certain movements, and then overall holistically how they're able to relate and correlate what you're saying as far as directions with movements. And this is hugely eye-opening because they might say something like, I really want to build upper body strength, or, I have low back pain. And then things are coming up out of the assessment. Like you're seeing massive imbalance from left to right side in their lower body strength, or you're seeing that part of the reason why they might be restricted in their shoulders is more postural. Just the way that they stand is telling you that there are things going on in their upper body that need to be addressed right away. And now you know from their intake that they sit at their desk for 10 hours a day and usually only get up maybe to go to the bathroom once or twice a day. So that process, refining a interview style intake, and then practicing your approach to what the assessment, the physical movements look like and how they move together, giving that away for free, I think is okay. And I think that actually a lot of yoga teachers and physical therapists, yoga therapists actually sometimes use this as a lead-in to people buying packages. But I wouldn't make it a forever practice to make it free. I would make it a practice for you to move people through it, and get kind of the kinks out. This is something that I did. I did it with my best friend who's also a yogi, and I just did it over and over and over and over again until I felt like the process that I had created had made some sense and had some flow to it and a method to it. And now it's part of my packages, and I don't do it for free, and it's nothing that you can get as a standalone service. It's part of the evaluation that we do when you purchase a package.
So tell us a little bit about the packages that you do, because I like that you say that you do it as a package. Can people book a one-off private class with you?
No. And so I never advise that people allow anybody to buy a one-off session. And that is really because I think that as a whole, we need to get out of the framework of offering people a one-time solution to a problem. Like, I'm pregnant and I need to find ways to modify in a group class, which I'm sure you hear a lot because you specialize in some ways in prenatal and pregnancy and in yoga. But generally speaking, I don't think that's the way to build a bridge between what that person is looking for and helping them get there. But I also don't think it's a way to build a sustainable business model. So I have a blog post where it's really dramatic. It's called How One-Off Single Private Yoga Lessons Are Killing Your Business. And I really believe that. I think that we need to be creating packages that prove over time their value. And the way that we do that is by getting people to invest their time and their money and their effort and their energy in working with us beyond 1 hour, one time. And so I think that as new teachers, it can feel a lot less intimidating and a lot less vulnerable to give people a one-time solution that costs X amount of money and sell that. It can feel a lot better, to be perfectly honest, than, offering somebody something that might cost $600, $700, $800, $900 and then having to be able to speak to what the value is of that. And so we shy away from offering packages, and it does a disservice to the people and also to us because we're not able to showcase the fullest expression of what we can offer as teachers in a one-on-one capacity during one session. I already said that the first lesson is all about establishing a baseline. And so if all you do is one lesson, you're only going to assess what this person needs, and you're not going to have any time to actually deliver upon that. So the best way to build your business is to have packages that generally range, in my opinion, starting with 5 or 4. But listen to that even. I really think 5 is the best, but I just went back a little bit to 4 to make it a little softer. But I really think 5 is best. So I'm going to go with 5. But noticing those things in ourselves, being mindful of the fact that things come up for us that are inherent things that we need to work through as teachers, as business owners, as people exchanging money for a service that is somewhat mystical. We're still describing and outlining and creating what modern yoga looks like. So there's a lot of misconception around what private yoga is. And we get to decide how we present it, how we package it. And so I always suggest people work with 1, maybe 2 packages. First one, about 5 is usually good. And the second one can be 8 or 10. And I usually like people to start with a really simple one. So a 5 pack is super simple. There's not a lot of bells and whistles. It's 5 yoga lessons. You have to use them in this many months or weeks. This is how much it costs. If you have a payment plan, this is what it looks like. And then the second one is more robust. So in addition to the 5 private yoga lessons, you might get some additional support. You might get some tangibles. You get some additional things that when you're having this kind of conversation with somebody, you're able to say, I offer A and I offer B. Here's A, but B includes all of that plus all of these things. And what I have found is when people have these extra things, they tend to have, this kind of result, this kind of benefit, and kind of going through the list in that way. So you're essentially upselling by providing more value and really outlining a structure that you've seen to be proven beneficial for past clients, or that you've created in a way, if you're new, that you think will be super beneficial for future clients. And it's not really a bait and switch. You believe in this. And so that's the other piece, is that as new teachers, you have to get behind what you're talking about. Because if you don't believe that private yoga lessons are a pathway to clients feeling their best, and you don't think that you're equipped to do this, that's going to come through in everything that you do. Every conversation you have about what you do, every conversation you have about how much it costs, every conversation you have about what you offer. So that's really some foundational work that we all need to do and dig down deep into talking about what we do so we're able to speak from that place.
This is a really good point. I love this because the confidence and the mindset that you have as a teacher, you're right. I remember when I was a new teacher and I'd kind of waver telling people, even just a registered session price, I was feeling bad for charging, and it was something that I had to work through on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't bat an eye. When I tell them the price of a package of private sessions, that's it.
Mm-hmm. That's the price. And that's the thing too, is when we do everything with intention, then there's a reason. We've established it for a purpose and we know what that purpose is. Now, this is where we get into trouble with money. Normally what happens is, in order to set our prices, we hop on Google and we type in all the possible studios in the area. We look at all their prices. And then we try to find some freelance teachers in the area, look at all their prices. And then we pick whatever one. We then recite that price to other people. And we don't know the value of that because we've stolen the price from somebody else. We haven't actually sat down and said, okay, I'm doing a 90-minute intake and assessment. I'm moving through what this person needs. And then I'm creating a plan based on that for 5 lessons. And then I'm also going to be giving them homework that's specifically catered to their needs. needs. And these things together, in addition to intermittent support from me via email, is going to allow them to sleep better, or to get up and down off the floor so they can play better with their grandkids, or it's going to allow them to have a safe and healthy and peaceful pregnancy, or whatever it is. And when we know that, when we can connect those dots and we've actually been the driver of what our price is, and then as a result, the value, then that's what we can stand behind. We can't do that if we just pluck a price off of a website and say, okay, this costs $65 an hour, because that's what it costs if you go to, Hot Yoga Express down the street. So I think that's an important thing to think about too. I really think when you're getting started, what's easy to do, and I did this, I spent hours and hours a day spending time looking at what other people are doing, not just in Iowa City, not just in Iowa, but like everywhere. I was like, what is this person doing? How much does this cost? How could I do that? Da, 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 da. And it's such a disservice because I wasn't spending time thinking about what I had to offer. And I was totally filling my own brain with other people's limiting beliefs and other people's essentially, maybe their own value, or maybe they had just done the same thing. And now we've created this thing in the yoga market where we're just all kind of using the same price model. It comes from nowhere, except that it's just come from everywhere, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. You need like a fresh look at the price point of even a yoga class. And I think that's great in determining what you think your class is worth and then providing value up to match that for your clients. That's
Absolutely.
Great. What about continuing with private sessions? Should your goal as a yoga teacher be, okay, I want to get this private student and then continue to work with them for the rest of their life? Or should it be, okay, I want to work with this person, give them some tools and send them on their way? Or is there a little mix of both?
Yeah, I think there's a mix of both. I think the first thing to think about is where your expertise or where your value as a yoga teacher lies. So are you somebody that wants to work with people in more of an acute setting? Are you somebody that wants to work with people that are on a certain trajectory? So acute could look like you are a therapist and you work with people that are experiencing some sort of post-surgical recovery. Like, let's get super specific. Or there could be somebody who's interested in something that has an organic lifespan. Pregnancy is a great example. You can be a specialist that works with fertility and then move into prenatal and then work with postpartum periods. And then after that period comes to an end, and then the cycle for you starts over in terms of needing to find a new client to walk through those different phases. Or you might be somebody who just works with one of those phases. You just work with postnatal women and maybe pelvic floor health. Or you could be somebody that has a very open-ended version, like you help people with creating and sustaining at-home yoga practices. So it really depends on where you feel like your passion to help people and what types of problems you like to help solve lies. But then in addition to that, the conversation on retention has a lot to do with how you set up your packages. So this idea of single sessions comes back up again because having somebody invest in a package is going to give them more results. And results are going to lead to changes in their lives that they can see and that they can touch and that are really results that are tangible and that are measurable. And then from there, it's going to either be that this problem has been solved for them and they move into no sessions with you or maybe maintenance mode, or they might be in a place where the problem has been solved, but maintenance, whether it's super consistent maintenance one time a week or check-in maintenance, is appropriate. Some people have the potential to be lifelong clients because of their means. So, private yoga is certainly something that is a higher level service and it costs more money per session. There are some people that can afford and are willing to invest continuously in doing this type of work. And that might be part of the equation as well. But ultimately, it's going to be based on what your specialty is and the relationship you build with clients. The key to long-term clients above and beyond who you help and how you help them is going to be about the ways in which you provide value for them that is something that they can actually see benefit from so that they decide consciously to continue to invest time and money and effort and energy. The hardest investment for somebody continuing to work with you is never money. It's always what they make it sound like it is, but it's really going to be, the question is really going to be, did I get enough out of this to continue to do it? And that is going to be what is ultimately going to help them decide if they want to continue to work with you or if there's a natural ending point, which some clients we come to a natural ending point with. They move, or we have something that's more acute where it ends and then we move on to a different client. However, when we work in that type of field where there's a natural ending point, then it's so much more important that our referral network is strongly established. So that way that person is multiplying into more clients like them versus the work being with people that we work with long term. The work there is even more important, is to deliver results and to really begin to drop some seeds that are eventually going to lead towards more long-term working with them in the form of months or even years later, still having them on board as a client.
This is amazing, Kate. So much information for people. I definitely will include some of these notes for people just on your points that you've made in this. I love this last thing that it's not about the money. That's not the hardest investment. And I think what really draws me to your kind of website, your message, is that being a teacher to one-on-one in a one-on-one setting has been really transformational for the people that you're working with, but also for you. I've been seeing that just in the work that I've been doing with private yoga students. One student came to me last week and said, you know what, I'm doing all of these things to try and get my strength back after a car accident. I'm going to the gym, I'm swimming, I'm working with this person, I'm doing this. And she's like, I'm seeing the most from the yoga. Mm-hmm. So, and I was, it is really meaningful to be on the other side of that you're kind of helping this person. Obviously, they're doing the work, but being there for them. What has been really transformative for you?
For a long time, I think that some of the things that were passed down to me from my previous teacher had a lot to do with this idea around professionalism. And really, I mean, he felt like there was yoga being taught that was really watering down the impact that we could have as yoga experts and educators and professionals. And so for a long time, especially as a young teacher, I mean, I started teaching yoga when I was 21. So I was at a place where I, at the time, did not value, and notice I didn't say afford because I was spending money on stupid stuff at the time, right? I had the money to pay for private yoga lessons if I wanted to spend less money elsewhere. But I didn't value it enough at the time to pay for what I was asking other people to pay for. And so there was a lot of dynamics that came up when I started around making money and charging and being professional and sitting across from somebody in their 50s or 60s and telling them what to do with their body as a able-bodied 20-something-year-old that really was fresh out of teacher training. And at the time, I mean, I knew enough to make an impact, but I certainly wasn't, I hadn't gone to college for 4 years to come out and then teach somebody some of this stuff. I had gone to yoga school for 200 hours.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff that comes up and there's a lot of fraudy feelings and there's a lot of stuff with moving through that and like sitting with that. And that was the other thing was that, we don't talk a lot about the fact that in private yoga lessons, you sometimes don't talk as much as in a group class. And sometimes you do talk a lot. And so it's this needing to be quiet more, I think, with private yoga lessons than being entertaining, like we are often taught to be in group classes. And that was really challenging for me, but I knew that the growth for me was in that space because I'm super extroverted. I very much gravitate towards, I did when I started group classes because of that kind of outward energy, that kind of upbeat, charismatic approach to yoga. And that was the kind of class that I taught. I mean, if somebody had described my teaching at that point in teaching as like reminding them of Catherine Budig, which somebody had asked me, like I did an interview and someone was like, who would you like to be like? And that's who I wanted to be like that vivacious, engaging, really infectious approach. Then I would have just been so excited. But what I was finding in private lessons was that it was really so much less about me and so much more about me being able to observe the quiet, which naturally was hard for me because when I was quiet, my mind was the loudest and it was telling me things like, what business do you have doing this? You don't even know what you're talking about. You're going to have to go home and open an anatomy book and find out the answer to that because you don't know. So that was really challenging, but it was massive in terms of being able to really step into my own as a teacher and really as an adult. And, flash forward, my very first private client that paid me is still a client that I have today. And I see her every Thursday. She's in her mid-60s. She legally married my husband and I because we got married here in Iowa, and then we had a destination wedding in Maine. And being open to that relationship was huge for me because there were so many things in the context of that relationship that I had to hit up against. And one of the main ones was being, how do I be professional but still be personable so that I can get in and help this person through the modality of yoga? Because I was finding that boundaries are important, and I teach them. I teach boundaries to people all the time. They're an essential part, but we also have to show up as humans. And I think that can be really hard, is to walk that line of being with our people and differentiating ourselves where needed as a teacher, but then also being a cheerleader and also being personal and also letting people in. It's a huge, huge, huge piece of the pie that many of us haven't even started to dive into. But once we do, it's immensely rewarding and we learn about ourselves. And I think that's where the real work comes as teachers. So I've had a similar experience, and I'm still profoundly affected by that and reflect on that. And this client that I'm talking about, she's getting surgery in a couple weeks. And so she'll be out of yoga commission for a little while she heals a bit. She won't even be able to do anything restorative. Anderson and I are going to go out to coffee with her one of those days. And that's something that I never could have conceived that I would open up in that way with a client. But for this person, it's appropriate. And so I think that's an important thing to think about as well, is being a judge here of what is going to be not only impactful for them and their experience, but also setting this work up in a way where it's so rich for you. And for some time, I was kind of doing the motions, and yoga felt like it was right, but it didn't feel like it does now. It didn't feel like my calling like it does now. And so that's the other thing, that it can take time for things to evolve into that as well as you grow into it.
Oh, that's so good that it's evolved to feel more like that. Because sometimes I think yoga teachers are thinking, okay, I just graduated my 200 hour and now all of the answers will be there. And that's good to know that it's been a real journey. And what a gem of a story of just finding that quiet and honoring that, relationships with your private students have boundaries. And then as well, like you said, it sounds like this person is really part of your family and your life with your husband and your son and you. So you have so much to offer in terms of information for yoga teachers. How can yoga teachers work with you, Kate, if they want to learn some more?
Yes. So my website is kateconnellpotts.com, and my book and course is called The Art of Teaching Private Yoga. There are many things that sprout out of that offering. There's a book, like I said, on Amazon. There is a online course that I run 2 times a year. And then I also do in-person modules. It's actually not modules. I do the full training, in-person versions of that full training all over the country in the US, and maybe someday in Canada. I'd love to come up to Canada and visit. And then I also have a really great free resource that is bumping and hopping over on Facebook, and it is called Private Yoga Teachers. You can find that by going to kateconnellpotts.com/community. And we're over 3,000 private yoga teachers strong, and it's all support. It's just a really great community of people who are getting started or are looking to refine things, popping in with questions and different suggestions. And I also post a lot in there about blog posts and podcast episodes and information about working with me. So that's a really great place to go as well.
Yes, I love that Facebook group. There's so many good questions just for any yoga teachers, whether they teach private classes or group classes or just teachers that are interested in connecting with others.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day. I know, how old is Anderson now, your son?
He is just past 6 months. I can't believe it. all the other parents are probably like, oh my goodness, it flies by. And I think that, it's been an interesting journey because I used to be like the queen of getting stuff done, and my identity is also evolving. I mean, that's kind of like the word of the year right now for me. And so, it brings a whole another layer of meaning to what I'm doing. And I think that even people that aren't parents can identify with how a transition can really bring clarity. And so I think that's just where I'm at right now with the time. But yep, just over 6 months, my little baby.
Oh, I love seeing posts about him.
He's so sweet. And I always said too, this is the thing too, is we need to give ourselves space for things to change. Like back, 3-4 years ago, I wasn't talking about the fact that this client married my husband and I because I felt like people might be like, oh my gosh, what a lack of boundaries and things like that. And with Anderson, I had vouched that we weren't going to share any pictures on social media because I want to protect his identity and his privacy, and it wasn't up for us to do that. And I don't post all the time, but again, things evolve and things change. And as long as you have a why with everything that you do in teaching and in business, then you will be able to really see where you're going, and it'll feel authentic and right for you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so nice. Well, I remember becoming a mom and thinking, what did I do with my time before this? I was wasting all that time. So
it's so true.
I certainly see you still doing your work in the world and sharing. So thank you so much for that. And thanks for sharing with us today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And thanks for holding the space for this conversation.
So there you have it, Connected Yoga teachers. Lots of information. If you're a regular listener or brand new to this podcast, thanks for tuning in today. I know how valuable your time is. If you have not yet left a review of the podcast, this is one of the best ways that you can give thanks. Simply go to iTunes, click on the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, and then click on ratings and reviews. Look for the button that says write a review. I love to read them out on the podcast. Also, if you have a question or comment about the show, you can now leave me a voicemail from our website. Visit theconnectedyogateacher.com and look to the right side of the screen where it says, Send Shannon a voicemail. A reminder that all of the show notes are on theconnectedyogateacher.com. Just look for this podcast episode 14, and you'll see also a link to that article that Kate was talking about, how one-off sessions could kill your private practice. I'm really thinking about this because I personally have my class packages in packages of 4, and Kate was saying today she prefers packages of 5. So that's something for me to look at myself. Think about today's episode, and if you could take one small bit that Kate talked about today, what would it be? What really resonated with you? What could you add in or alter to build up that private yoga practice for yourself? If you have questions for Kate, she's in our private Facebook group, The Connected Yoga Teacher. To find that, simply go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and click on the button that says Join the Community. Thanks so much, Connected Yoga Teachers. Continue to share the yoga that lights you up.